Live at the Union Buildings as we wait for the President to address the nation at 8 o'clock. A very good evening to Mzwai Mbeje. Can you hear me? I see a shot of the backdrop of the city of Tshwane there. Can you hear me, Mzwai Mbeje? Good evening.
Loud and clear, Griselda. Of course, we're coming live to you from the citadel of power, that's Pretoria, as you can see at the background there. So we indeed expect, as you've indicated, the President in the next 1.5 hours to address the nation, to update the nation on the measures or on the assessment of what he has seen since he announced the lockdown 2 weeks ago. Today, Griselda, we are on day 14 of the lockdown, so we are exactly a week away from the 21 days that was originally scheduled. The big question now is, will the President say anything about extension or lifting the lockdown? So that's quite a big question. But I can just do my own summary, Griselda, there, given what has been happening and, of course, watching the events and everything associated with it. When the President, Griselda, first announced the lockdown, it was only 62 people who had been affected, or rather infected with the coronavirus, and at the time there was no death. Today, we are standing at 1,845 infections, and we are having 18 deaths. So if you then look at the rationale and the logic, and then you ask yourself, already yesterday we had an increase in the number of infections. It was actually 96. Looking at all those factors and put them together. So he announced the lockdown when it was only 62. There was no death. So today we are standing at close to 2,000. We have deaths. So what is it that he has to do? There's an issue of the economy on one hand, but there's an issue of health and life on the other. It's quite a delicate and a very difficult choice for the President.
Well, Mzwai, it was quite clear that the President would address the country in a couple of days. I would recall on a story that you had covered when he was inspecting the water management in the country. He indicated that he wanted to get some scientific, if I can, advice first before he makes any decision about South Africa's way forward. We saw him do that this morning in Pretoria. So do you think the President would basically have quite a good idea now about whether South Africa's lockdown has been effective at all?
Oh, well, Griselda, I mean, if you and I can make up our own, perhaps, conclusions based on what we see and on what we have observed, for someone like himself, it's not only what he has seen and what he has observed. He's also gone there. He's also got scientific evidence, even the projections. He is aware. I mean, one of the things, Griselda, that he said when he gave that briefing 2 days ago, he basically said, many experts are saying if we did not lock down the country, the number of infections and possibly deaths would be much, much higher. Now, this morning, he went to the data center where they are able to track exactly how is the spread going, so what are the success rate at containing it. So given that he now is in a unique and a very advantaged position to make a decision, I think he would really make a very, very informed decision. But as I said, Griselda, so whatever decision he makes, not everyone will be happy, because the issue of trying and kickstarting the economy is quite important, but at the same time, the issue of health and life, very, very important.
Mzwai, what the President also said on lockdown day 12, which is 2 days ago, he also expressed concern about, I quote, pockets of South Africans who are not adhering to the lockdown regulations. How important do you think it was for the President then to announce or rather address the country just also on the eve of the long Easter weekend, where already there are concerns about the number of cars that we're seeing on the road and quite a number of transgressions by looking at the number of people who have been arrested who are simply not adhering to the lockdown regulations? How important was it for him to do it now?
It's very, very important, Griselda. In fact, when you refer to some of the transgressions, one of the things that he really said was that he was, by and large, happy that the majority of South Africans were abiding by the regulations. But of course, there were those who were not, and those concerned him a great deal. And if you looked at the stats this morning, the Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalula, released very interesting stats, basically indicating that increasingly people were starting to disregard the regulations. And remember, the disregard of regulations does not only put you alone in danger, but all of us. So given that as much as most South Africans are abiding by the regulations, but there is an increasing number which is disregarding those, in fact, it does indicate or give you an idea that perhaps they may want to, well, maybe toughen a bit, because at the end of the day, the initial reason why the lockdown was even effected was to try and stop the spread. The spread has been happening during the lockdown. Yeah. So how do you even start to then open now whilst the spread is happening? So it's quite a very interesting situation, and I think perhaps my own assumption, and having looked at the situation, yeah, and perhaps having interacted with various stakeholders, is that I think the president may want to send a message to South Africans to say, this is not a joke, this is serious. Perhaps he may give us 2 more weeks, who knows?
SABC political editor Mzwai Mbeje live to us from the Union Buildings there, just ahead, of course, of that 8 o'clock address tonight by President Cyril Ramaphosa. What will he be conveying to the nation tonight? I guess everybody's wanting to know whether there will be an extension to South Africa's current lockdown. Of course, South Africa is sitting on 18 deaths at the moment and 1,845 infections. So everyone looking forward to what the president will say about how South Africa will take this forward.